Well, entering year two under Lincoln Riley, USC's got Caleb Williams back at the helm, and it kind of feels like winning at least 10 games is somewhat inevitable.
You are Locked On Pac-12, your daily podcast on the Pac-12 Conference. It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On Pac-12. I'm your host, Spencer McLaughlin. Thank you so much for making this your first listen or your first view of the day. If you're watching on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, and your number one source to stay up to date with our, I'm assuming, media rights free and beloved Conference of Champions. Like, comment, subscribe, rate, review, please, and thank you wherever you listen to or watch the show. We're talking about the Trojans today, making predictions on their schedule. We hit Utah yesterday, the reigning Pac-12 champs, the team they beat. The Trojans, we're running through them today. So we have Marc Kulkin. He's the host of Locked On USC, covers the Trojans for On3. He's been at fall camp. He's all over the place. He's on Twitter. He is confident in the Trojans, as you are all about to learn. But I am as well. And I just feel, Marc, that when you look at what USC brings back, what they brought in, Lincoln Riley at the helm, and Lincoln Riley's track record, and that they're entering year two, and we would always expect teams to get better in year two under a new head coach than they were in year one. I look at USC's schedule, and look, it gets tougher on the back half. There's no question about that. But 10 wins feels inevitable to me. Like, the more I look at it, the more I think about, boy, USC over 9.5. That feels like actual value to me.
Yeah. Bet the house, man. Bet the Pac-12 conference, because I'm sure you could afford to buy it right now. Sorry, I had to throw that in there. I know, I know where you are with this, Spencer, and I hope you still have this other job when you're not doing Locked On Oregon. So, blessings to you.
Yeah, anyway, well, I hope so as well. But we'll just have to wait and we'll just have to wait and see.
So, I agree with you. USC's schedule, it's backloaded. That first 6 games, there is no reason USC should not be 6-0. I mean, if you want to go through each game, that's up to you. But I don't know who's the biggest challenge of those first 6 games. Where I'm going with this is when you look at that, the back end, Utah, Notre Dame, Washington, Oregon, Cal, UCLA. That's the back end. Everyone would say, all right, well, there's got to be at least 2 losses in there, right? Well, give me the 2 losses, because here it is. I'm predicting USC will go undefeated this season.
Boom. Marc is confident. Marc is feeling good.
Well, so you talked about it. You said the biggest growth is for a new head coach is from year 1 to year 2. They made
usually a growth.
Well, they made a significant growth from 4-8 to 11 wins. And they've got the right people coming back that were a part of that 11-win team. So for me to say, all right, well, they're now going to take that next step that you kind of alluded to, I don't think it's so far-fetched to say, well, I know what USC did in the offseason to shore up their defensive woes. Did Oregon do enough in the offseason to shore up their defensive woes? Because USC plays at Oregon this year. The other road game is the one at Notre Dame. USC was able to put up a lot of points on Notre Dame last year in Los Angeles. I anticipate them doing the same and ending that streak of losing in South Bend. So again, those are the 2 games that really, I guess, strike fear in Trojan fans' minds. But Washington in LA, Utah in LA, those are the other games that I think people are focused on as far as USC's schedule.
Yeah, I agree. And, the reason that I feel there is some value on USC over 9.5 is you look not just at what they have coming back, but you don't have to even think that USC will make the playoff or go undefeated or, heck, even make the Pac-12 title game, depending on how tiebreakers work out, and think that they can get to 10 wins in a relatively manageable fashion. Like, I can see a path for other teams. I can see a path to Washington winning 10 or more games. I can see a path for Oregon. I can see it for Utah as well. For Utah, it's probably the most challenging of the group of teams that are actual contenders. Their schedule is pretty brutal. But with USC, it feels so feasible. So let's get into these games here. And by the way, Lincoln Riley, as a head coach in a full season of college football, his win totals are as follows: 12, 12, 12, 11, 11. So when I say that going over 9.5 seems like it's reasonable, it's not as if I'm not basing that in actual data there. So
Sure.
USC, as Mark, you alluded to, does not come out of the gates swinging with a big time marquee matchup. They do play one of the earliest games in college football. They play San Jose State. They will play them at home on August 26th, one of the first games of the college football season. A week 0 affair for the Trojans. And look, we are less than a month away from that. So that's pretty darn exciting, frankly, amidst all this realignment craziness and nonsense and whatnot. But football is really, really close. But it goes San Jose State, Nevada, and Stanford all at home. First 3 games at the Coliseum for the Trojans. Then they go at Arizona State, at Colorado, and then they host Arizona. And look, I am fully on board picking USC to go 6-0 in those games. They are going to be heavy favorites in all of them. They should be. But if I told you right now, Mark, USC finds a way to go 5-1 in those games, which team do you think has the best chance? I'm not saying it's likely,
Sure, I
but
understand what you're saying.
yeah. Who's the most likely to give USC trouble? Because I have a team that I would think, but I'm curious what you think of that group.
Well, I'm going to assume we're on the same page and say it's Arizona.
We are on the same page.
Just because of their offensive firepower capabilities. The potential is there. They return Jaden DeLaura at quarterback. Jed Fish's system is another year older. They brought in some good receivers. I think they've attacked the transfer portal fairly aggressively.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess if USC's defense hasn't gotten it figured out, they can get into a shootout, and that could be a team that, yeah, if the ball bounces funny, somebody gets hurt, sure, opportunity presents itself.
Yeah, the one kind of caveat there is that it's in Los Angeles. I would say there's a greater likelihood if it were being played in Tucson. And, I like Arizona's trajectory. We know they have a quarterback who can throw the ball around the field and make plays. We know they have 2 really good wide receivers. They don't have 3 the 3 they had a year ago, of course, because Dorian Singer is now going to be playing on the other side. But they did pick up Montana Lamonius Craig from Colorado. That's a real name there on the perimeter. So another weapon for the offense. I
used to watch him in high school 7-on-7. Love that kid's game.
I mean, he was shining out in the spring game, and Colorado was talking about. I was like, "Ooh, that's a weapon for Shador." And then he was like, "Okay, bye. I'm gonna go. We played on national TV. I'm gonna go down to Arizona now." But I think that trio of receivers, T-Mac, Cowing, Lamonius Craig, that's a legit trio right there. DeLaura can sling it. The question for them, much like USC, is defensively. But to your point about the portal, I like what they have done with adding Power 5 defensive transfers who I think make them better on that side of the ball than they were a year ago. They're still going to have a lot of room to grow, I think, but I think they have improved at the very least. So I think we agree that it's the most likely. But once again, I am not sitting here saying I think Arizona upsets USC. I think Arizona is going to pull an upset this year, but I don't think that it is going to be USC on the road.
Yeah, no, USC, there's going to be a little bit of, chippiness in that game. USC took 3 of Arizona's better players. You mentioned Dorian Singer. On the defensive side of the ball, they got Keon Bars, as well as Christian Roland Wallace, who I've been to the last 2 fall camp practices that the media's been invited to. Keon Bars and Christian Roland Wallace, these are the types of players that USC did not have last year. They had top-end talent for string, but it was that back end, the depth that these guys are bringing. And as USC season wore on, it just defense just kept getting worse and worse and worse. So, yeah, I understand where you're going. Offensively, Arizona's going to play with everybody. I don't think it matters who they're playing this year in conference.
Me neither.
But to your point, defensively, are they going to be able to take that next step? I don't know if they have enough on the defensive side of the ball to stay step for step with USC this year.
Yeah, I think it's a tall order, and it's a tall order, especially on the road as well. So we agree that USC starts 6-0, but then it starts to get fun, Mark. Then it starts to get really, really fun. You all can have fun, or as much fun as you can, upgrading your car and keeping it on the road if you go check out eBay Motors. Because for a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit, just like putting together a roster via the transfer portal. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage, look for the green check to know the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Guaranteed fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride eBay. Okay, second segment sip completed, and we're ready to keep things going with USC's schedule. So, after Arizona, they have that lovely middle of the year non-conference bout with Notre Dame, and it is on the road this year. Should be a big time game. Now, you've said, Mark, that you think USC is going to run the table and go 12-0 this year. I don't think it's impossible. Spoiler alert, I am not going to predict it. I think there will be at least one loss mixed in there, but how do you feel about that Notre Dame game leading up to the season, given how last year's game played out and that this year it'll be played in South Bend?
Again, USC this year compared to last year, and they were able to handle Notre Dame fairly easily, but now they're I hate to sound like the intro to the $6 million man, but they're bigger, they're stronger, they're faster, and I'm talking about in the trenches, specifically the defensive line. They brought in a big-time linebacker from Oklahoma State, Mason Cobb, to help really shore up that linebacker unit to combine with Eric Gentry. USC, I don't think people really truly understand how close USC was to making the playoffs last year.
One half of football.
They lost at Utah in the middle of the season. I believe it was game 6?
Game 7 or 8, I think.
USC was undefeated going into Utah.
Yep. Utah was 4-2. I think USC was 6 or 7-0.
USC had 2 key injuries in that game: Jordan Addison, Eric Gentry. It basically came down to the end of the game where USC's defense just didn't have enough gas, didn't have the depth. And then we know what happened in the conference championship game. Caleb Williams pulls up lane, but USC's on their way to a 21-3 lead. And then once he's injured, history has been written. But that's how close USC was. And they have made a huge, significant emphasis on defense this year. And there are coaches and players playing for their season. And that's why going into Notre Dame, first of all, that game's always circled on the schedule. And knowing, as I talked about, there's really 2 games that USC has to worry about to go undefeated. That first one's Notre Dame. So that's why they will be focused, ready to play. And again, they want to break that losing streak in South Bend. It's been a while.
Yeah. So I think with the Notre Dame game, what it provides is also representative of what it can take away. And that game in particular, I've kind of talked about this before, but the Pac-12 teams that are capable of making the playoff, you can't just be good enough. You have to also have a schedule that will allow you sufficient strength, because it's still a 14 playoff, right? I mean, I despise the 12-team playoff and realignment and everything like that, but that's a conversation for another day. But we still have, good, I'm not alone. We still have a 14 playoff here. And so you have to be a 1-loss or undefeated Power 5 champion to get in, unless you are Notre Dame or Ohio State from last year. And by the way, Ohio State needed help from Utah to beat USC, or else Ohio State doesn't make the playoff a season ago. But you also have to have, I think, at least a respectable non-conference win, unless you're going to go unbeaten. So like Michigan, for instance, I think would have been punished for their weak, pathetic, unacceptable, ridiculous non-conference slate a season ago if they had lost to Ohio State. I think you could have, like, they would not have gotten in over a one-loss Pac-12 champ in USC. I think they could have fallen even further because they didn't play anybody. Like Ohio State was able to stay there because they played Notre Dame, which was a respectable team, but Michigan played, cupcake 1, 2, and 3. Like it was a joke, and it's a joke again this year, and I lament all of that. But Notre Dame is kind of the key to USC having a playoff caliber schedule. Now the Pac-12 is going to be deep and competitive this year, so they might have had it anyway, but I think it helps because if it comes down to a slim margin and it's between USC and a one-loss Clemson ACC champion, yeah, having a win at Notre Dame would be helpful. I don't trust Notre Dame's offense. I think Sam Hartman is an upgrade over what they had a year ago, but I think this USC team is quite good. And though it's in South Bend, and I think it'll be tough, I do think the Trojans are going to go in and get it done. And look, I've had my qualms with USC over the years for sure, but I'm no Notre Dame homer either. So I'm kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place, frankly. But I like the Trojans in that game because I just, even with a struggling USC defense, like let's say they have a bad day, I still like USC's offense more than Notre Dame's.
No, look, that's the key is USC is going to be able to score, and I use the term loosely, at will this season. I mean, what they have returning on offense, led by Caleb Williams, that's not going to be the issue. The issue is, can the defense just give them the ball back enough times where they don't have to score every single time they have the ball?
Right.
Last year, what was great about USC's defense is they knew how to take the ball away from other teams. However,
they didn't know how to tackle.
So I don't think they can anticipate, whatever their plus minus ratio was last year that led the country. It was a sick number. It was disgusting.
Oh yeah, it was outrageous.
Yeah, Caleb Williams had a 42-5 touchdown to interception ratio, and 3 of those interceptions came at the end of the year. So those are the things that USC just has to stay consistent with. And again, they just need a top 50 defense.
It just has to be serviceable. That's it.
Well, last year was what I considered serviceable.
But it wasn't sustainable.
Right. And that's because of the depth. They didn't have it. Serviceable to me was, all right, you got another turnover. Now you got a chance to score more points. But again, once you lose your first string linebacker, you now have your second string linebacker starting, and the guy behind him, there's a reason he's third string.
Right. Well, you know what I pointed out about USC's defense last year, and Trojan fans weren't particularly happy with me, but they didn't have an I told you so moment later. I did. Is that when they were forcing turnovers at the rate that they were in the early portion of the season, I was sitting there like, that is not sustainable. You have to be able to actually get stops. Teams aren't going to turn the ball over forever. Lo and behold, Utah puts up over 40 points in each of those 2 meetings because in large part, they protected the football. And USC actually forced a red zone turnover in Salt Lake City as well, or else it would have been probably another touchdown for the Utes in that game.
USC won 11 games last year. In all 11 games, they won the turnover battle.
Right. But but there's a difference between, hey, everyone is better when they win the turnover battle, and USC's defense last year was the gap between them being terrible and being good enough to win the game was them forcing like 3 turnovers and having a pick 6, seemingly every other week. So let's get back to the schedule here. I think they win at Notre Dame, and then it's the game that I think everybody, certainly out west, has got circled as one of the games of the year. It's the revenge game for USC. They're going to be at home. I am picking them to beat Utah because of all those factors. And I look at what happened last year, Mark, and say, okay, they were basically even in the games that were played. USC had the lead in the conference title game, but they were operating on a slim margin, and that's if Caleb Williams isn't able to do everything in a spectacular fashion. Suddenly, Utah can close the gap. But they played in Salt Lake City, and Utah emerged victorious, and my takeaway was hell of a game. Utah is still really good, but if this game is played anywhere other than Salt Lake City, USC wins, and I feel that way about this matchup going into this year. It's not at Rice-Eccles. It's at the Coliseum, so I'll take the Trojans.
Yeah, and that's really the point, is Utah away from Rice-Eccles. They are a different team. I don't know if it's the way Coach Whittingham coaches the team, as far as, offensive or whatever it is. They don't play the same, whether it's with the same confidence, the same swagger.
Everyone's different away from home. Nobody's as good on the road as they are at home.
Utah has beaten USC in LA, but that was Clay Helton's final year. Everybody beat USC in LA that season.
That's true.
The year before, USC, 2 years before, when Utah came to LA, they had a backup quarterback in there throwing jump balls to Michael Pittman. It's like Kyle Whittingham did not want to change whatever his game plan was, and USC pulled off the upset. So I have history on my side. Utah in LA, it's not. This is why I gave you the two games that I'm concerned about. And don't believe for a second that Caleb Williams and the rest of the Trojans aren't upset about the two losses last year.
Oh, I fully believe it.
Factor.
I fully believe it, and that's part of my confidence. I'm really high on Utah this year, being high on the two-time defending champs. What a take. Where did they find me? I don't know. Anyway, so
isn't going to be healthy this year.
That is the biggest question. That is the biggest question. But if you tell me right now he's healthy for all 9 conference games, Utah can go 7-2, 8-1. I fully believe that, because Kyle Whittingham is just doing it over and over and over again. You may or may not know this, Mark, but in each of the last 4 full football seasons played in the Pac-12, 2018, 19, 21, and 22, Utah has appeared in the Pac-12 championship game 4 times in a row. So I'm not going to sit here and doubt them and say, well, this is the time they're going to pull back. I don't know. As long as Cam Rising's healthy, I think they can do it. So next week, after the Utah game, they go at Cal. Everydayers know that I'm bullish as you can be on the California Golden Bears. I think they're probably going to be a bowl eligible team. Tune into tomorrow's show to hear my final record prediction on my beloved Bears at this point. But one of those wins is not going to be against USC. I presume you agree, Mark, seeing as how, unless you change your mind in the last 22 minutes.
No.
Yeah. So
I haven't seen an offense from a Justin Wilcox team in his career.
Not yet.
I don't
Not
think
yet.
it's happening this year either.
They made a good hire with their offensive coordinator. I think that's what I will say. And
maybe
they
it'll
brought
happen
in
too for that offensive coordinator.
Yes, and they brought in a new quarterback as well. So I think they'll beat Cal, and they'll be at 8-0 going into the final 3 games. And look, this is a tough stretch. You go Washington at home, at Oregon, and then you host UCLA.
Mm.
I do not see, Mark, USC going through this slate undefeated. I think that between Washington's ability to throw the football and keep up with USC's offense and go punch for punch with them, you could lose that game. And I think going at Oregon to Autzen Stadium, USC fans know it's a very tough place to win. They haven't won there. Now, they don't play there every single year, but I think their last
scheduling quirk where it seems like Oregon's got the better end of the schedule on that.
Well,
don't deny it, Spencer, because we can go through the years.
Well, by the way, I'll touch on that in just a sec. But I think the last time USC won at Autzen Stadium was 2011, when you guys kept my Ducks out of probably the national championship game that year. But what I will say is that when I look at this schedule, I definitely got the sense, Mark, that this was very much a message from the Pac-12 of like, hey, Trojans, don't let the door hit you on the way out, punks.
Are you saying they're going to treat USC in Eugene the way they treated USC in Salt Lake City last year? Are you saying they're going to get that type of treatment?
Well, from the fans, absolutely.
No, I'm talking about from the officiating and certain.
I don't think the officiating is ever going to get set up to go against USC.
You're the one who's raising the issue here. I'm not.
I'm just saying, like, the conference put together the schedule, and when they put it together, they knew that USC had potentially started the orchestration of the downfall of the conference. So they might have said, "Hey, why don't we give you these easy wins, lull you into a sense of comfort, and then just give you a gauntlet where you have 5 games in your last 6 where I could see them losing." Like, I think USC is going to do well, but I could see them losing to Notre Dame. I could see them losing to Utah. I could see them losing to Washington or Oregon. I actually can't see them losing to UCLA. It's a rivalry game. So maybe, but I don't. I'm kind of down on UCLA this season, but I think between Oregon and Washington, I'll pick the Oregon game, half because I'm a Duck, but half because it's on the road. I think that's the game where they stumble, but I do think that they're going to win the other one. And back to what I started the show with, why USC I think is a good bet to get to 10 wins, Mark, is that you look at the game, they just have to avoid a slip up. And then you look at their 4 hard games: Notre Dame, Utah, Oregon, Washington. If they go 2-2, 2-2 in those games, not 3-1, not 4-0. If they just go 2-2, they will be a 10-2 football team. And Lincoln Riley's teams have not slipped up very often against, vastly inferior opponents. So I trust them to not do that. That's why I think they will be at 10 wins or more. But I'll say, flip a coin and it lands on the head for USC, and that Trojan, thingy majig or whatever is behind you right now. And then they'll lose at Autzen Stadium to Oregon because of the very simple factor that it's home and road, and they come beat UCLA. That's how I think their final 3 games play out.
Okay. And you're not going to get a lot of argument from many people. I've already put it out there that I anticipate USC going undefeated throughout the season. I chose the Oregon game as one of the games of concern. But again, I watched enough of Oregon last year, and I tried to keep track of what they did to improve their hot poo-poo defense. I mean, look, are you denying it?
No. I mean, it was not quite, USC's level of defense a year ago, but it was certainly not up to the standard that we were hoping for.
Yeah, it's nothing to brag about.
No, it was not. I've talked about it all offseason, Locked On Ducks. Like, it needs to be better. It should be better. And they have made the personnel moves to get it better.
So I guess the question is, does Oregon have the offensive firepower to play step for step with USC's firepower?
I think the answer there is yes, because you have Bo Nix back. If you didn't have Bo Nix, I would have question marks. But I've seen what Bo's capable of. As long as the offensive line, which by the USC game will have had a lot of games together and an opportunity to really gel, you have new pieces there. But if that gets figured out, I have no doubts about the offense. It'll be, can you rush Caleb Williams enough to make him uncomfortable? I think that'll be the question, because a year ago, if Oregon had played USC, Caleb Williams would have had an hour and a half to sit there and pat the ball.
I don't know if Caleb Williams gets uncomfortable in the pocket. I mean, he just does stuff that makes people go, what did he just do? So I understand your point. Yeah, you want to get to him. And Caleb has a tendency to hold on to the ball too long sometimes. He wants to make plays. It's a highly competitive guy. So yes, if Oregon can get to him, if any defense can get to him, that could be a problem. Is Oregon going to be the team? We'll find out.
Yeah.
We'll find out. I know the game's already sold out.
Oh yeah. Oh no. USC fans, they got to be ready, because Oregon fans are going to be giving it to them on that particular day. Marc Kulkin is the host of Locked On USC. He thinks the Trojans are going 12-0. I've got them at 11-1. Either way, I think 10 wins or more is a pretty solid bet. So if you can get them at 9.5, I would go in and fire such a wager. But Mark, thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
Oh, anytime.
Appreciate everyone listening. I'll see you next time. And until then, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.